Welcome, everyone. My name is Veronique Kabongo. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on the planet. I'm here today in the offices of the World Bank Group in Washington, D.C. for an interview with two very special guests. Albert Zeufack, who is the chief economist of the Africa region, largest region of the World Bank. Welcome, Albert.
Thank you very much, Veronique.
And the second guest is Mafalda Duarte, who is the head of the Climate Investment Funds, a very large investment fund for climate change, 8.3 billion. Welcome, Mafalda.
Thank you very much, Veronique, and pleasure to be here with you, Alfred. Albert.
So, since we're going to talk about Africa and finance, we'll start with a little quiz, and I invite all of you to put the answer in the comment section. Here's the question, and we'll reveal at the end the right answer. Africa's blue economy is made up of vast lakes, rivers, and oceans. Now, how many kilometers, not miles, kilometers of coastline does the continent have? I give you three options: 50 kilometers, 26,000 kilometers, or 1 billion kilometers. So please put your answer in the comment section, and don't forget to share this interview with your friends. I'll start with my first question to you, Albert. Okay. So very recently we had the spring meetings here in Washington, D.C., and you presented the state of the region. There was the opportunity to issue the Africa Pulse report that I have here in my hands. So if you could give us like a very short version of what's the macroeconomic outlook of the region, and more importantly, how is climate change going to impact African economies?
Thank you very much, Veronique. The macro outlook for Africa is positive. In fact, after the worst economic performance in more than 2 decades in 2016, we're now projecting that Africa will grow at around 2.6% in 2017. This is a good news. And there is an even better news, which is a number of African countries remain resilient. We have 7 economies on the continent that are still growing at above 5.4% for the past 2 years. And these economies include Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Mali. This is really a good news. And we are also emphasizing that Africa needs to deepen the reforms and especially continue investing in infrastructure. And as we invest in infrastructure, we have to be climate smart. We have to invest in climate resilient infrastructure because that's one way to increase the efficiency of our investment. In fact, one of the major risks we see in our macroeconomic outlook for Africa is climate change. Take drought, for example. The east coast of Africa has gone through a succession of floods and droughts that have now, in its latest incarnation, drought has led to a decline in production of maize by more than 19% between 2015 and 2016. This is extremely serious, and it's affecting agricultural productivity, and it's affecting the livelihood of people in rural areas. It's affecting nutrition of children, which is extremely important for the future. So there are a number of ways through which climate change affects the economies on our continent. I mentioned drought, but drought not only affects agriculture, they also affect power production. When the level of reserves in dams go down because of drought, it causes difficulty in generating electricity to power our cities. Climate change is also affecting our cities through the rising level of oceans. And given that a number of African economies, a number of African capitals are based on the coastline, this is a serious challenge. So African countries cannot turn a blind eye, Veronique. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to climate change because the impact on African economies is significant.
So, thank you, Albert. So, Mafalda, to you, I mean, I'm struck by the size of the challenge. So we really need trillions, not billions, to cope with climate change. Is it too expensive for poor countries to invest in climate change, in particular for Africa?
Thank you very much, Veronique. In fact, the challenge is very large. As you are struck, so are we. Um, Let me say this to this pertinent question whether it's too expensive for poor countries. It is important and, in fact, crucial that both rich and poor countries invest in climate smart infrastructure and other types of investment because those will be the sustainable investments in the future, and those will be the investments that will ensure or ensure a future, the promise of a future to all of us, and in particular the future generations. Having said that, as Albert was saying, it's in the poor countries' interest to make sure that the infrastructure investments that they are projecting to make take into account the climate change impacts, what is already being observed and what we know will happen in the few years to come. And so climate resilient infrastructure, making sure, Albert was speaking about droughts and floods, that an agriculture production, it's important to make sure that seeds that are drought resistant and flood resistant are the seeds that start to be used, supporting farmers to adopt those. But and having said that, it's also in the poor countries' interest to reap the benefits of technologies that can make energy access more affordable than currently is. I mean, it might be counterintuitive, but the fact of the matter is, in many parts of Africa, rural communities pay quite expensive energy access bills because they are using diesel, and diesel is very expensive in those parts of Africa. And so, now, of course, it's, as I said, there are costs in the short term. It's, the estimates range from, 377 billion for low carbon investments, and until 2030, more than 200 billion in adaptation investments, also up to 2030 to meet the goals that African countries have expressed in their national determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. And this is a significant fiscal burden for the countries. And so climate finance, that's the role of climate finance. And that's what the climate investment funds, what we've been doing. More than 2.7 billion of our 8.3 billion, we are supporting investments alongside the multilateral development banks, governments, private sector, supporting investments in 26 countries in Africa. And, what I'm really proud of, and, this pin is really a demonstration of that as well. Africa can. I'm so proud because what I have been seeing over the past few years is that African countries show the leadership on climate action that we need to see more globally. And many countries in the African continent showing extraordinary leadership on climate.
Wow, so both of you agree. No, it is on the agenda, as we heard from you, Mafalda. It's on the agenda of African countries. Africa continues to rise. So climate finance, game changer for Africa to continue to rise? Who wants to answer first?
Well, Veronique, let me say, as we move further and deepen the macro policies, one important question is how do we mobilize enough resources, enough revenue for our government to do the right kind of infrastructure. So climate finance would have to play a very, very important role. And just like, all the efforts we are working towards, we basically trying to crowd in more funding for our development, I believe, climate finance is certainly going in the same direction. And when you think of the type of investment that we need to make to boost growth in Africa, all aspects of our infrastructure would need some form of climate smart investments, right? So, one very positive fact is that the number of PPPs, public-private partnership that are being signed in Africa are mostly concentrated in few sectors, especially in the energy sector. But the very good news is that most of these are actually signed on renewable energy. Solar investment are actually driving the way, and we are hoping to see a leapfrogging, the type that happened in the telecommunication industry in Africa over the past 20 years. The kind of success we have seen in telecommunication is one where we would want to see it replicated in energy, in renewable energy precisely, but in other climate resilient investments. And I believe this is where the Climate Investment Fund would have to play a big role.
So, Mafalda, what's your take?
I have a message of hope because, what we have been learning since the beginning of the Climate Investment Funds in 2008 is that climate finance is a game changer. It has provided the incentives for the governments and the private sector institutions to make the right investment choices, the right investment decisions, either by, and let me also say here the critical element of the way we work. We work in partnership with the World Bank and other four multilateral development banks. So we associate our below market rates concessional finance or type of finance and the possibility of addressing risks that exist in the African continent. We ally that with the expertise and the know-how and the track record of the multilateral development banks working in these countries. And that gives comfort to the markets. That gives comfort to the local commercial banks. That gives comfort to the private sector institutions to come in, even if it's the first time. We are supporting many of first-of-its-kind investments in renewable energy in several countries. And, as Albert was saying, it's the right thing to do because it's going to be more affordable. If you look at Kenya, geothermal investments in Kenya, the government has a big objective of investing 5 gigawatts up to 2030. They are right now at more or less 650 megawatts. They added around 300 megawatts in the grid in the past 2 years, more or less. 30% cost reduction to the people. This is not, this is the reality. And this is important because you have the double benefits of having a clean energy source and providing more affordable. So absolutely it is the game changer. Now we have to be collectively prepared to raise the level of ambition because we are talking about billions that will be invested in infrastructure and they are necessary to sustain economic growth and social development. And we have to make sure that this type of finance is available for the right investment choices.
Thank you really for both of you because I hear on both sides positive energy, hope, growth for the continent, and thank you for your work, the two of you. So before I give the answer,
you're most welcome.
Before I give the answer to the quiz we started with, which is a very complicated one, one word to our audience to close. One, what would it be? What would you choose?
Veronique, I will choose 2 words. Okay. Africa can.
And Africa is already demonstrating an enormous leadership that we are all very proud of. Count on us to continue supporting you.
So aptitude and leadership. Thank you very much. The answer to the quiz? 26,000 kilometers. Thank you. Don't forget to share and hope to see you soon again. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.